Hey everybody, what's happening? Welcome to episode number 183 of the Flicksation Podcast. I'm Eric. I'm here at Flicksation Studios, P City, Wisco, hanging out and talking films with the likes of the Minister, joining us from Denver, Colorado. Minister, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here. And I guess I don't know if annoy is the right word, but I'll just, I'll say annoy. I'll say the same thing to you guys that I say to my wife every single day about 6 o'clock. And it's just great that it's 50 every day. It's 50 degrees normal? Every day. Yeah, it is. It is. The average high is 49 or 50. And it's weird. I mean, I've just never experienced it. I mean, I had to have the car windows open today to not be hot. So it's plenty of people listening maybe don't experience the extreme cold. But the difference between a high of 26 and 50 is like major.
Yeah, I mean, this last 3 or 4 days has been like 32, 33 here, and I'm thinking, man, how great it is to be so warm out there this time of year. And let's throw it over to a guy who's probably sitting in 85-degree weather or something like that right now. Robert Gassaway in Phoenix, Arizona. Robert, welcome.
Yeah, feeling good. It was 75 here today in Phoenix.
Oh.
So can't relate, guys. It's 61 now, so 50 sounds really cold. Don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, very dry though here. Is it very dry there, Robert? I mean, how dry are you? It hurts here. It's so dry.
It's so dry, we've lost Robert.
Yeah, he turned into just like a little pile of ash. It hurts right now. I'm in pain because it's so dry. Is it dry there? Do you feel it?
No, it was foggy, and we get weather, a little bit of rain here and there. It's like gray skies and overcast, but it's still nice. It's only temporary.
So tonight we're going to be talking about Oskar Werner, not the Oscars, but a couple of films where Oskar Werner either stars or supporting role or whatever, just by chance, because a couple of films strung together here that are definitely worth talking about. Nothing new this episode, just 2 older films. So from 1962, we're going to be talking about Jules and Jim, French film, Truffaut's 1962 film. And then from 1965, we're going to be talking about a movie based on a John le Carré novel called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, 1965. That one directed by Martin Ritt and starring Richard Burton. But Richard Burton starring in this one. So that is the program tonight. Email the show, FlicksationPodcast@gmail.com. Call or text the voicemail line anytime with whatever. FlicksationPodcast@gmail.com or 608-535-9302. You can call or text us on the voicemail line.
Eric, before you go,
yes.
I have to say, I think Christian needs to apologize to our fans for what he did on the Oscar show. It was a true embarrassment, and I'm kind of ashamed to be associated with it. So.
Well, yeah, that's why you avoid things like that, I assume, Ian, or just because the Oscars are pretty shitty these days. But all right, shots fired. So let's talk about our first film of the evening. This one from 1962. Again, French film, Francois Truffaut's Jules and Jim. Decades of a love triangle concerning 2 friends and an impulsive woman. This one stars Jean Moreau, Henry Surrey, and one Oskar Werner. So let's throw it over to Robert Gassaway. Robert, how did you find Jules and Jim? First time watch?
No, this is a second time watch. I've been lucky to see a handful of Francois Truffaut films in theater over the last few years. I saw the noir film couple of noirs, Shoot the Piano Player and The Bride Wore Black, which also stars Jean Moreau, who stars in this film as Catherine. And then I think the one he's most famous for directing is The 400 Blows. And that stars a little kid, and apparently it's kind of autobiographical, I think, like based on his early life growing up in Paris. And then I saw Jules and Jim in theater as well. And these films just keep getting increasingly better. Like the ones I just named, that's in order of getting better and better in their run. And I don't think we've ever talked a Francois Truffaut film in the history of Flicksation.
Well, there's been a mention way back. We're talking like episode 7 or so. I brought Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451 to the table, which also starred Oskar Werner. So it does exist somewhere, but you may be surprised by this, Robert, because I don't think you've probably seen that many, but on this show, you're probably Flicksation's French New Wave guy.
Yeah, I would say so. I've always considered myself a Francophile. I'm fascinated with French art in every form. And I think that's why I love Jules and Jim. Like, as we're talking about, this is about people who love art. And they're all artists. Like one sings and one's an author and a painter, a poet, or they're all artists, and they're always like patronizing the arts in the film and doing like they enjoy life through art. And Truffaut is very much that way. Come to find out, he was a critic before he was a director, and he wrote for, how do you say it, Cahiers de Cinema, French magazine. It's very, the lauded, prestigious French film magazine.
Yeah, the one that puts Bruno Dumont films in the top 10 of the decade. That magazine.
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's. I don't have a deep understanding of the history of French New Wave, but I'm pretty sure that's where Godard came from too. That was the whole thing. They were young critics who then shook up kind of film by making them in their early 30s or whatever. I don't know when Truffaut started, but I think this is his third film and he's only 30, so he probably started late 20s. But
yeah, I know that he was a wildly acclaimed filmmaker before the age of 27. I was reading. And he passed away of brain tumor at the age of 52. And so like you kind of view his film career as brief. It's cool to see him as an actor, like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He has a small part just because Spielberg looked up to him and loved him and wanted to work with him in some way. Like this film, it gets so much done in a short runtime. Truffaut really packed a lot into his quarter century of work. And like I said, it starts with that autobiography, those films with that little kid. It's about his life growing up. And then he gets into crime dramas. He directs some period films, a few sly comedies, and sometimes his films are a mixture of all of those. And so I love that he's like, if he's an author, he's on different sections of the bookstore. There's like the different crime dramas, the coming of age films, the love stories. And I also love that he reveres Alfred Hitchcock, but you wouldn't confuse Truffaut's work for Hitchcock's as much as he looked up to him. And really those French directors in that French New Wave are really what gave Alfred Hitchcock, my favorite director, the boost in the arts world, because he was just known for putting his image first. And his films were events because of who he was, but they weren't looked at as art house films until the French directors started looking at them that way and writing about them. And Truffaut had that ability to look at films because he could make films, but also was eloquent enough in his writing because he was a critic that he wrote books about Hitchcock and famously interviewed him. And there's a film about that. Interestingly enough, that documentary is made by the film festival director of the New York Film Festival. So he was somebody that programmed films and now has quit that job and is making films. He made a film called Diane this year, Kent Jones, who I'm talking about. So I just love to see that. That's not very common for somebody to cross over to in the art world to kind of analyze them and talk about them and promote them and then set that aside and start making the films. But that's what we have here with Truffaut. This film, I think, is my favorite because it starts off so incredibly playful and charming, just as like a friendship film between Jules and Jim. Those are the two guys in the film. It's in storyteller mode. We have a narrator. It's very fast paced. And these two buddies, they live this fast paced lifestyle in their 20s, and they're in pursuit of art and a good time. And so this young director, the way he shoots it, this is 1962. It's these weird zooms and unusual editing. It's very French New Wave. He does a lot of freeze frames. There's a famous foot race on a bridge from this film, and that's the introduction of Jean Moreau's character. Just before that, she meets them, and the way that's edited, she draws on a mustache and puts on some men's clothes and runs around town with these guys for an afternoon. And it's just the way it's edited. Like you hear this voiceover breathiness in that race down the bridge, and she's confused for a man by someone walking on the street, and it's just a very odd entrance. And to where this film ends up, it's amazing to me. I talked about the fact that it's a love triangle film. I don't know if Eric read the synopsis, but it's like the most blunt synopsis ever on IMDb. It says the decades of a love triangle concerning two friends and an impulsive woman. I mean, I don't think that's factually incorrect, but I wouldn't put it quite that bluntly, IMDb. But they respect each other and they love each other, and they're lovers of arts, like all arts. We see Jules and Jim like fencing. They love martial arts, and then the three of them go to the theater, and one of them's a novelist, and they talk about poetry and philosophy, and they love, they buy matching suits, or they love dressing up, so they love fashion designers, and they love people that make good wine and good beer and good cigarettes.
Kickboxing. Or whatever that was.
Yeah. And that's the life in this film until World War I breaks out. So we're watching them in a pre-World War I setting in Europe, having a great time. One of them is Austrian, Oskar Werner, oddly enough. He's playing an Austrian, and he's I guess they're in Paris. We don't see the Eiffel Tower, I don't think, but they're in Paris, and so the other two characters are French. And then war breaks out, and the two guys, Jules and Jim, get drafted, and their armies are fighting against each other, and they're afraid of killing each other. It's such a drastic difference from what I was just describing with this buddy film and this love triangle to all of a sudden, is this a war movie? Well, if it is, it's definitely an anti-war movie. And just because of the way the film, like I just described, it's so utterly jarring when that happens in the film, and that's how the war was. I think they couldn't have seen it coming, and so it's realistically jarring to their lives. But the war footage does not last very long, but it's very artistic in the way it comes out of that. I think with Truffaut shooting the Jim character traveling through the battlefields in Germany or in Austria, I guess. And the war memorials. He's looking for soldiers that he knew. And so we just saw these guys as 20-year-olds running around, these three friends and lovers, I guess. And now they've gone through a war, and what happens next? There's a reunion, and there's more freeze frames, and there's fallout, not just from the war, but in this relationship. So Jules has married Catherine, but as soon as there's this reunion with Jim coming to town to visit them and see how their family's doing, she's discontent. She's been discontented, and there's infidelity. Jules is disconnected and insecure, and that's happening while their friend has just come back from the war, and it's a reunion. And I love these scenes of dialogue where when they catch up, like I said, this film covers so much ground in a short period of time. It does that with the dialogue. Just they go on a walk. Catherine and tells Jim, "Chase me," and he chases her, and then they end up just telling their perspective of what's been going on in their relationships. And so this is only maybe an hour into the film at this point, and it just covers like the maturity process and the emotional discoveries in each character, and then among these three lead characters. I would consider there are three leads in this film, even though, yeah, it's a narrator. There's not one of them, so I would consider them three leads, which is unusual. But now we throw a fourth character in this love triangle, so it's a love square, I guess, with Albert, and he's her friend, their mutual friend. They all know him, but he plays guitar, and with him, Jean Moreau sings beautifully a song that they've just written together, and they consider moving in together because she's kind of got this harem of fellas now. But we see as the audience that they each have different qualities. We can see what she likes about each of them, and they all get along together famously. And there's a daughter from Albert that lives in the house with Jules, and now Jim moves into the spare bedroom, and we see that they see each other differently with other people. You know, when you have a one-on-one relationship or you have a family with kids, you see each other a certain way until somebody else comes to visit for a month, or you start hanging out with the neighbors more and more, and you see your partner with other people in a different way. And you could see that perspective in this film. And when Jim moves into the spare bedroom, and their little chosen family continues with this just love and respect for each other. So when I saw this for the first time in the theater, like maybe a year and a half ago, I was just blown away by it at this point. And I don't really want to like describe any more of the plot, because people definitely need to see this film. I think it's an all-time classic, and lots of famous critics and filmmakers, like I've said, have listed this as one of their favorites. But where it goes from here, where I've just kind of left off, there's another half hour where so much goes on with how their lives kind of wrap up, and how Truffaut tells the story. And so if you just jumped around in this film in different scenes, they would not seem to connect. The way this filmmaker spans that gap from where they start to where they end up is pretty impressive. It's just different. And I think it's even different from other French New Wave. It's not just different than like Hollywood films, of course, but I don't know. If anything, it was reminding me of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, when they have kind of a love triangle going on. That was another film I saw for the first time in theaters in the last year and a half, right around this time. And I like Jules and Jim a little bit better. As great as Sundance is as a film. And I love Jean Moreau as an actress. If I'm the French film fanatic on this show, I think it's maybe because I appreciate their actors and their celebrity in France, what the huge stars that people like her and Anna Karina or Catherine Deneuve.
There you go.
I love watching her films even now in the older years, like Catherine Hubert, right?
Isabella
Hubert. Yes, thank you. So, and Vincent Cassel, like they just don't like, even their bad actors like Gerard Depardieu, we appreciate. Like
Binoche, man, Binoche.
It's kind of like how like some American celebrities are not really big here, but like France loves them or Germany loves, like Hasselhoff. I think that's kind of how I am with France. Like I love every artist of every form that comes out of there. Like that's like everything French art is just great. And I love, like, if from what I hear when you go there, it's all repertory cinemas showing old films all the time, just as much as new films. So I would probably end up moving to France, or at least going there for a month to like live in a house with the other people in a relationship and just see how it goes, because it's really appealing to me. And this film is like a commercial for that lifestyle.
While there's very big plot points that you could spoil, as you said, you don't want to, I would probably consider this not a movie you could spoil. I don't know.
For sure. Yeah, I just didn't want to keep listing it all the way to the end and just but yeah, you could totally tell if a character dies, that wouldn't even spoil it in this film.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, because I think it's pretty easy to say the star of this thing. Well, first of all, I think the star of this thing is the music, and it's that song you're talking about is actually really wonderful that she sings. I almost forgot about it and didn't have it in my notes, but and I looked it up later, and it's considered one of the greatest of all time, and that's not really surprising. But I saw this like 6 years ago, maybe, or longer, and I remembered very little other than I liked it. I remembered basically like the mustache and running on a bridge, and I was like, oh, it's a nice movie that I liked a lot. But as soon as the score kicked in on this thing, I was like, I immediately paused it and looked it up. I was like, this must be some very famous piece of music, because I remember this, like I've heard it 50 times, and it's almost like goosebumps because it's so wonderful. And I guess it's not. It's just this Georges Guilleroux score to this film, which is just very well known as one of the best scores ever. And it's just this wonderful, lush, classical score that repeats a lot, but I mean, it's stuck with me for years, and it's in my head right now. This thing is beautiful. I imagine it made an impact on you, Robert. You like that score?
Yeah, absolutely. And I figured if characters say that they just wrote it, they've been working on it, and the audience is not worthy of it, but you can't choose your audience. They're not just play some pop song or some song that's known. That's French artists, man. They can just come up with it and make it work.
It works. But I think outside of the music, it's pretty easy in most French New Wave, and this one included, to say the star of the film is the style, of course, and you touched on it plenty, and that's kind of why it made such an impact. I think these movies surely offered up different types of characters, specifically female characters, than we were used to, especially American audiences. But I think style is what everyone's aped for 50 years since. I mean, it's the pace of these things. It's you talked about how much time it covers and how much even in a little scene is covered. That's because it cuts like crazy and they talk really fast. You know, keeping up with the subtitles at times was difficult, and that's just the way they were doing it. But it's full of zooms and newsreel footage and playing with the frame a little bit. There's and I wish I could remember the scene because it would give it the context it needs. But there's a comedic use of freeze frames within a conversation that was probably my favorite movie or part of the whole movie. It's just like
I was
choice.
afraid my screen was just freezing.
Yeah, right.
The
Yeah,
first
it was
couple
like
times.
glitching. Yeah.
That's when she's describing like that she used to be very serious, and she does like 3 serious faces, and she says, "Now I smile all the time. It's like this," and then it does 3 smiles. But you can hear her voice the whole time. That reassured me that I didn't lose internet connection when I was streaming it. I could see her face pausing, but I could hear her speaking, so I knew Truffaut was intentional there.
And I don't know, and this is such basic like surface level knowledge of French New Wave and stuff, but that's kind of how people felt with Breathless, right? Where like he was the guy where the cuts weren't matching, and it was like, this is jagged and awkward, and something's wrong, right? It's bad. It's wrong on purpose, or what's going on here? And I just think, yeah, there's just an experimentation, playfulness, and life to the editing, to the pace. That is, I mean, now we've seen so many different attempts at this type of thing, but going back to this film from 1962, it still feels really alive and exciting, and that's definitely the case in pretty much all French New Wave I've seen. But this is a really, really wonderful example. There's a few things why I'm not completely in the tank for French New Wave, why I haven't seen 40 Godard movies, and some of it's a feeling, and there's one thing I can point to specifically that I'll get to, but I think just stylistically this thing's wonderful, and I think there's a lot of things I'm curious about this relationship. Maybe we can dig deeper into it, but that I have a few questions and something I took away that maybe isn't the intention, but what I had on my mind. But just like as an overall film, I'm a really big fan. I just want to bring Eric in so he's not stuck outside this. How did this thing work overall for you, Eric?
Yeah, liked it a lot. Very flighty. I put my pen down like literally 4 minutes into this movie because I couldn't really take notes because that was the narration heavy part. There's not that much narration in this film, but there is a bunch at the beginning. So those subtitles were moving so fast, I was like, oh my God, I can't take notes on this. And then some of that early dialogue was really fast too. So definitely wish I would have had, I'd definitely like to see this again so I can take everything in a little bit better. But I hated to take like my eyes off the screen to try and keep up with the dialogue because there's just so much cool stuff going on here. They seem kind of primitive, these primitive video tricks and stuff that he uses. Very organic to the film, but they even though they're kind of silly, they feel fun. Like there's one where Jim is like looking out a window over to like the house or whatever from his room, and it does this like corner fade thing. It's funny. And those hiccups that I thought were hiccups but were freeze frames. So yeah, I like that stuff. Some of this is shot very manically, almost like an old school, not shaky cam because it's definitely not somebody holding it, but it goes from like wide shots to these quick cuts of like only like the shoulders up from like a down angle, or not really a Dutch angle, but because it's not cornered, but shooting up basically. So it seems like the editing is disjointed, but it's probably on purpose, like Ian stated. I was really charmed by Oskar Werner in this, his character, and the way the whole thing ends up. Yeah, very, very, very well executed film. I kind of love that. I think I'm not sure how to say it, but like Teresa, something like that is her name. She's like the first gal that's hanging out with him, and then she returns. And
you just like her because she's great at smoking.
Oh my God, there was some great smoking in this. Oh yeah, that was the steamboat thing.
Yeah, she could do the tricks with the cigarette.
Yeah, I forgot about that. No, I love the whole gag where she was talking to Jim while he's pretty much completely ignoring her and talking to other people, and she's just spouting out what she's done for her life, and then I became a whore.
Yeah, it was completely crazy story. Yeah. Wonderful story. Yeah.
So yeah, well written, well shot, a lot of fun. Sometimes the I guess the French New Wave stuff we've talked about that's like way out there hasn't been hitting for me as much, but something like this, yeah, this is more up my alley. So yeah, dig it.
Well, it's really easy to get fixated on the style, as why wouldn't you? But this is based on a or I guess an autobiographical novel by a soldier or something from World War I. It said Truffaut found it, or the guy didn't publish it until he was like in his 70s or something. Then Truffaut stumbled upon it. So you don't want to discount this story as a whole, and specifically that character that Jean Moreau plays, because that's a fascinating character. And as much as it's called Jules and Jim, this thing revolves around her, and the world in this film revolves around Catherine character. So, I don't have any big answers, and first of all, I don't think this film sits in judgment of that character almost at all, if it does at all, to where many movies telling a story about a character like her would, I would think. And if the genders were flipped, I wonder if no film ever would sit in judgment of that character. But, I mean, this is very broad. I don't know if anyone has an answer, but how do you take this relationship? Like, how are you supposed to take this? Robert spoke of it almost entirely as functional and full of love, but there's definitely some dysfunction here and some hurt, don't you think?
Yeah, I think more than anything, I would just call it natural, in that even like you said, the film's disposition, it doesn't judge her. It's just showing her nature. That's her nature. This is Jim's nature. That's Jules' nature, and they all have their nuances and idiosyncrasies, but they all get along and respect each other because they have a love for each other. That love changes. It's not like all in love and romantic all the time, but that respect that can grow out of having love. The film respects them, and maybe, yeah, I wonder how different Truffaut's adaptation is from the book. Did the book have that even playing field as well? But it does really come across that it's just presenting their nature, and therefore the relationship comes across as natural, even when the fourth guy is brought into it and the daughter is there. And I was like, well, how is she seeing them? If they're saying, the mom is saying, I don't want to be understood, and the men are saying, well, I see her differently when she's with another man. Well, how is this little girl viewing them? But it makes a point to show that she's like the happiest little girl and cracking up, and she has a great time, and she loves all the adults, and you don't need all these labels of what their relationship is. She just knows it feels natural, and they love and respect each other.
Well, there's a point. So after the war happens, and Jules has married Catherine, and they live in the Black Forest in Austria. And then Jim comes to visit, and they kind of form this perfect family. And they're making funny faces at the dinner table. Everyone in town thinks they're weirdos, but lovable and nice. And everything's hunky-dory, as it really has been the whole film. We're almost an hour in, and this is like as wonderful as anything's ever been. And they're going to live happily ever after. But from that point on, there really are as much as the film respects and shows their love, there's cracks and regret in some of the characters, the way they talk about it. There's the Jules and Jim characters both express, or through narration expresses, that there's plenty of times where they don't speak their minds about some reservations or jealousy and stuff. And there's clearly some element of destructive nature to Catherine when things are going well, or she just gets bored. So she's this big force of nature, and that's clear, and they kind of just revolve around her. I'm just interested by I don't know, like, there's a couple things that make you rethink the relationship a little bit. And it's the narration talking about their regret or not mentioning their jealousy at times. And specifically, this is kind of spoilery, but based on what happens at the end, there's a line near the end, I think in narration, where it says Jules was relieved. And that's very interesting, the way this ends leaves him relieved. So I think the film does not judge the character. I don't judge the character, but what I found myself kind of thinking about with this was, clearly there's deep love. Clearly I don't think destructive is necessarily the right word for what she is, but there's a restlessness about her that leaves things kind of ever changing, and you can't just settle down. And so I don't know if destructive is the right word, but I'm kind of likening it to some kind of addiction to change or something, and it's uncomfortable to Jules. So I'm linking this to addiction and his character not confronting it at any point, because it seems as though he just lets her do it, lets her, like, this is who she is, let her be who she is. And in the film, I think it's probably noble, and it's just accepting someone for who she is. But I'm just thinking, like, is that how everyone would view it? Or I guess that's probably how we're viewing it. It's just him accepting, right? But ultimately, where this film ends, was there a point where it's cowardly for him not to step in and see where this is headed? Or how do we view it? Because I think of people who, maybe somebody who is an addict in a more like normal way, like a drug addict or something, and you always think, like, you have to be brave and step up and like speak truth to somebody. But sometimes you just want to be part of someone's life, even if that's part of their life. Like, say they're an addict and you just want to be part of their life because you love them. And that's the place Jules is in here. But based on where this ends, you wonder if the film, is there a place where he could have stepped in? So I don't know. I still kind of view it as him just accepting who she is, loving her and accepting her for who she is, and just wanting to be a part of it. But I don't know. That's a rambling thing, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about with it.
I think you make great points. I think that people that do have drug addicts in their life, if that person overdoses from drugs and finally loses their life, that person that loved them does have a sense of relief as part of their sadness and grief, and it's terrible, but they don't have to see them suffer and lie and the pain that it causes everybody in a drug addict's life when that drug addict's not there. That comes with it's like a vacuum. And I think that Catherine in this film, it's kind of like how planets' orbits are changed by other planets or by other celestial bodies. She has a gravitational pull that he's addicted to and can't pull out of that orbit, so that when she pulls away from him, it causes so much stress. And then when that's not in his life anymore, it's like he can drift. There's not that sense of relying, and he's so empathetic. He's always thinking about Jim. He's always thinking about her, but he's always wrapped up in his own thing. He's so insecure. So when that thing that's the source of your anguish and your most happiness is not there, it's gonna hurt, but also have a odd sense of relief to it. And I think Truffaut is getting at that. I don't think this is painting a picture of everything's lovey-dovey and they'll always love each other. There's a lot of pain and driving each other away from each other. Like they attract and repel each other at different times.
And the way she reacts when Jim pulls away is ugly. There's some ugly behavior, or specifically when she invites them to dinner and then just wanders off with the other dude.
Yeah.
Like there's a vindictive, Jules talks about how she'll punish him with infidelity and stuff.
Yeah.
So I like that the film isn't in judgment of her while also presenting a really, really fascinating relationship. And I can tell you what I don't like about French New Wave stuff often, and it is here, and it I get over it, and I like most of these movies. But dude, there's always frolicking.
Yeah,
like, I think
a good frolic, right?
The older I get, the less charmed I am by frolicking, and there's a lot of frolicking. And I remember, we talked about a Godard. What was the one you brought? We talked about a Godard movie, Robert.
Oh yeah, that one with all the frolicking.
Yeah, there's a lot of frolicking, and I complained about it.
Yeah, Pierre Lafaux.
Love Story or something.
Yeah.
Pierrot.
And I complained about it, and then like a year later, I was like, "Oh, that was really good." I got over the frolicking eventually, and that's you know who else loves a good frolic? About 2 hours of frolicking is Terrence Malick, and that's
I'm just gonna
hard for me to get over. I think the older I get, the less and less charmed I am by anything frolicking. So it's a problem. But
I was kind of grizzled that these are. I mean, they were early 20s is what they're depicting early on, but I was just like, man, these are 3 grown children. I couldn't fathom what any of them were doing to get by. I mean, I know what they were creating art-wise, but it's like, okay, where's the money? Is there any?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. But
I liked the way that they described her in this. It had something to do with like her father was it like a diplomat or something, and her mother was basically like a street person, and she only operates in those 2 extremes, something along those lines. Like she's very everything or nothing, and nothing in between. I thought that was interesting. And another thing, kind of that, I don't know if Bertolucci made New Wave movies, but if not, he came right after, and of course he's Italian. But that dude made a film, his last movie, Bernardo Bertolucci, when he was like 78 years old. Or one of the very latest ones. It had Michael Pitt and Eva Green. That was full of frolicking too, and the dude was like 70 years old. So these guys don't get over frolicking. If you started in the 60s in Europe, you retain the frolic in your films.
I'm thinking that somebody that's like really into astrology would go for this film, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, because she's such a Sagittarius and he's such a Taurus, but he gets along with him because he's a Cancer or Gemini." I don't know all those categories, but somebody that does, I bet there's a lot going on here with that.
I didn't see the film. You both did, but I'm gonna call this the real Marriage Story. That works for you?
I guess.
Or how about a manic pixie nightmare girl movie? What's that one? Manic pixie nightmare girl? Oh, God,
yeah, like that.
I don't actually think it fits, and I think it's almost sexist to use it. I just thought of it. So, but yeah, this is the real Marriage Story. This is the marriage story I want to see.
I guess Albert would be Alan Alda.
All right, guys, that's going to bring us into the What You Drinking segment here on the Flicksation Podcast. Ian, the Minister, what you drinking?
Well, we're going to stodgy old England with our next film, so I decided to run to the liquor store tonight and get... I've had this on the show before, but just my favorite...
Scotch?
No, I mean, it's beer, but it's English beer, and I wasn't going Newcastle because... there's no reason not to. I just think it's probably bad. But, yeah, it's just this Samuel Smith pure brewed organic lager. Again, I had this years ago on the show. It claims to be the oldest brewery in the UK from like 1600 or 1500. I don't know if that's true, but it's just like a really clean, pure lager to go with our spy story.
I'm drinking a can of St. Archer Gold, which is a new light beer. It had a kind of, I don't know if it's been around somewhere, but it had a big rollout around here a couple of weeks ago. got a 6-pack for free from a beer salesman, so checked it out the other day. And it's a very solid light beer. It kind of reminds me of like Rolling Rock, which I always liked. So these are these goofy like 12-ounce cans that are tall, but they're super skinny. So I don't know about all that, but pretty good tasting beer. Not typically a light beer guy, but these are pretty tasty. So St. Archer Gold, check it out. Robert, what you drinking?
Well, if you like IPAs like I do, sometimes you start looking for what differentiates them. So I picked up one with a twist. It's called Juicy Jack. It's from Santan Brewing Company out here in Phoenix. And yeah, Juicy Jack. So it's IPA, but it's got, it says aromas of peach, guava, and tangerine. But then it also says there's a generous amount of oats to give it a rich, full-bodied flavor. So IPA with peach, guava, tangerine, and oats. It's it's not overly citrusy. Like, it doesn't need to be a summertime IPA. It's dead of winter, and it's 75 today. So it's just the right amount of citrus.
I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break here, then we're going to come back with our second film of the evening, 1965's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, right after this. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening to the Flicksation Podcast. We are always happy to have you on board. Please contact the show anytime via email, flicksationpodcast@gmail.com. Call or text our voicemail line anytime, 24/7. Leave your thoughts for the show or comments, 608-535-9302. Follow the show on Twitter @Flicksation. You can get all of our episodes, even the old ones that iTunes no longer carries, at flicksation.libsyn.com. That's Libsyn. Flicksation.libsyn.com. All of our episodes, all of the time. Or catch any one of our other number of podcasts available from members of the Flicksation team, including the horror bi-weekly podcast, It's Only a Podcast, in-depth Twin Peaks talk and other things over at the Book House Podcast, a show about Twin Peaks. The Third Act Podcast, more general movie discussion for you. Check that out. Be sure to check out We're Watching The Watchmen as we discuss the upcoming HBO series, The Watchmen. Thanks, everybody, again for listening to the Flicksation Podcast, and check us out elsewhere. Have a good day. All right, welcome back. Before we get into our discussion of The Spy That Came Into the Cold, I just want to point out that Flicksation is starting its 10th season of film viewing here. Yeah, 10th Flixmas coming up. Decade list. Huge year, guys. I don't know about the movies. I haven't dug too much into what's coming out. 10th year, Minister. We've been plugging along pretty hard here.
Yeah, well, isn't it generally considered within, like, media, I don't know, podcasts, there's not a lot of 10-year-old podcasts, but within, like, film or, like, film series or TV shows, the 10th one or the 10th season is almost always the best, right?
Sure.
Like the 10th season of Cheers. Who could forget that?
Yeah.
Or Frasier. Yeah, Frasier kicked ass in season 10.
And Seinfeld cut off after 9. So what's that?
Because it was going to get too
Coward.
good.
He's a coward.
Cowardly. So let's talk about our final film of the evening here. This one from 1965, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. This one is directed by Martin Ritt. British agent Alec Lamass refuses to come in from the Cold War during the 1960s, choosing to face another mission which may prove to be his final. Starring Richard Burton, Oskar Werner, and Claire Bloom. All right, so based on a John le Carré novel here. In fact, I read it is almost word for word from the novel. No changes except the name of the female character for just minor reasons or whatever. But le Carré, famous for his series of spy novels in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Big hero of the British here. So I've not seen or experienced much. I have my favorite film of 2011, I believe, was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Glad to get into some more here, but the spy that came in from the cold, Ian, you mentioned this on a previous show in a feature segment or something. So
Yeah, I can't remember what the theme was, but I found a way to work this in. I think I had seen it and then watched it again for that. I'll talk around this movie a little bit first, because I think you brought up le Carré. Anyway, John le Carré. He said hero of the British, but he's not too. His view of the British intelligence is not too rosy. So that's one thing to say. Yeah, he was a former MI, 6, 5? I don't know the numbers that
5 and 6. I think he was still 6 when he started, when this one came out, the book.
That's right.
Came out.
And he was only in his 30s. This was I think it's like his third book, and he was only early 30s, but this is the one that launched him. And the way people write about it now, and I don't know because I haven't read interviews with him and stuff, but they talk about how he purposefully set out to make the anti-James Bond spy novels because he thought those were basically terrible and embarrassing to him, or it just bothered him in some way. So he decided to make the anti-James Bond, and that's definitely on display in many ways. In one is that they're not the good guys, the English, and there's no action, and it's completely de-glammed. There's no good guy. There's no point, probably. Very often, no point. Instead of sports cars and Bond girls, it's manila envelopes and green walls in boring like boardrooms or just like hideaways where just people just like very fussy, like generic older men eat boring dinners together and talk about things. So talk about important things, because that's a really big element of le Carré, is that every single word and every single action has a meaning and is important. You don't always know if it's the truth, and you don't know why it's important, but that's a major element of his writing, and obviously of the stuff made out of his stuff. So that was a big thing in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy that I loved so much, is it was like, some people thought it was boring. Obviously Eric did not. I found it just insanely gripping because every word mattered, and every word had multiple meanings to different people, and it could be a lie or a cover, or it was just really, really fascinating to me. So and yeah, there's a lot of le Carré. I know my father read all of it and likes basically all of it. After the Cold War, he started writing other stuff. We reviewed one, I think. What was it?
Most Wanted Man.
There you go. Which was, post-Cold War, he had to write about different things. So he started writing about like Palestinians in the 70s, going back. And that one was about it was an Eastern European like terrorist sect or something. So he wrote about other things. But I know my father's a really huge fan of the 70s British miniseries of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which had Alec Guinness playing the George Smiley character. So that can be found at Eric's Libraries if you want to check it out. But
not to throw this too far off, but there's also like a series for the Friends of Smiley or something is one of the other books. There's also like an 8-episode series of that. Was that good also?
Yeah, I think so, because I think it was essentially the same deal, because that's a 3-book trilogy.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they finished it though, unless they combined 2 of them into one. But yeah, and I read this right before watching it. So it's only like a 200-page book. But it gives me it makes me not want to start the full review of this, because I actually it felt weird watching it afterwards, because a film I'd seen twice and had a good feeling on, it completely kind of tipped over the boat here, and it was a different experience, a weird experience, because it was so close. But you said word for word from the book. That may be the case, but only if they cut about 40% of the words, because this is very streamlined. And that's what I'm most curious about, how the actual plot played to you guys, because it's so streamlined to me. And the biggest cut that I think the film does well to make you get it, but the biggest cut is that the whole book has our main character, Richard Burton character, his name is Lemus. There's an internal monologue throughout the whole thing. So in every situation, whether it like setting up the operation or even within an interrogation or something, you have his internal monologue of how he views it and of how he's starting to understand things and what he knows and what he dislikes. And above all, just his disdain for everything and how stupid and pointless all of this is, and how kind of just it's very clear within this film, within that book, and within the other stuff of him we've seen, that really the sides are equal. They're both awful. It's a bunch of old drunk men, or I think it's even verbally articulated late in this film. It's people without ideology, without honor. They're drunkards, they're queers, they're lowlifes playing cowboys and Indians. And there's no morality. It's all just a game. And even further, I think, is there even a point? Or are these people just creating a game and creating reasons to justify the existence of their operations and of their departments and stuff? Like, does any of this mean anything? And that's clear in the burnt out Lemus in this film, and in the way Le Carré writes about it, which is very, very not James Bond. So I would go to Eric. I'm just real curious, because you are actually a Bond fan too. So I don't know if you want to bring that into it, but that disdain is clear to you on Matt, I imagine. But how about the film as a whole? You're a fan, or?
Yeah, on first watch, I pretty much love this film. Thought about James Bond the entire time. What's interesting to me is when I look at these 2 films we watched tonight. It's the first one is the same year Dr. No released, so it's like the exact year. And then we were on the 4th Bond film, Thunderball, when A Spy That Came In From the Cold came out. So total 180 on the Bond stuff. But yeah, because very similar feel to me. It's definitely more streamlined, because at first I was kind of buckling in to have the same difficulties following the plot as I did the first time I watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And this one was a lot easier to kind of grasp what was going on. It was a different experience, kind of a more basic experience, but still pretty riveting. Did not expect to see the George Smiley character in here. He's very briefly makes an appearance in this one. So that was a big treat. He's mentioned a lot. He's not in the film that much, but he's mentioned a lot in the film. So good there. I mean, I just love the tension in these scenes. Context with Burton's, it's just grizzled. Just his attitude that this is all stupid, and he comes across that with that attitude spot on. So you can see it basically in all of his looks as he kind of goes through the motions through this, and it still twists and turns. So the Oskar Werner character is good in this one as well. The two, him and Burton, spend a lot of time together in this film. There's one funny part where I I was wondering why they just like randomly climbed this mountain, and were just like having a conversation on this mountain in their like suits and whatever, or not suits exactly, but Werner has this nice jacket on, and Burton's got this like shirt and tie, and you see him just getting to the top of this small mountain or whatever, and neither of them are disheveled or winded at all, and they just have this conversation up there for no reason. So that's kind of funny. Yeah, just thinking about the Bond films in comparison to this, I mean, yeah, total different thing, very much fantasy in the Bond world, but just the fact that those are, I guess, big budget, and I don't know if this isn't, or did he just decide to go with the black and white here? Because, yeah, I mean, definitely had the technology and stuff for regular color at this point, but black and white does fit the feel and the organic push of this film, so it sort of works where the Bonds are big and flashy and need their color or whatever. This is more down and dirty and kind of has the mood of a black and white film. So yeah, I'm definitely now much more interested in looking for some more of the Le Carré stuff. I was actually thinking about those miniseries. I wasn't sure if I was going to like them or not, but if you say your father, who is indirectly responsible for a lot of things that I love at this point, I would definitely check that out for sure. Big George Smiley fan. Honestly, I didn't know he had other. I just thought he was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I did not know he existed outside of that. So, good news.
Yeah,
I love these slow burn spy films. Love them.
I think it's something like 9 Le Carré books are Smiley centric books, even. So he's his guy. I don't know. I don't know if there's a character that represents Le Carré himself. I've never put that together, because you don't get a feel for Smiley within this film itself. But but if Le Carré is Remus, oh boy, does he have a lot of like disdain and disgust. I mean, there's I gotta go to Robert, but like there's a couple of scenes that are high comedy of people, just Remus openly mocking people for having any beliefs. Like he just like his interactions with Oskar Werner plays Fiedler, the first person who interrogates him, and it's like they try to have a philosophical or like a ideological discussion, and he's just mocking the idea of having any kind of values, which is a pretty funny way to exist. And he kind of just says that's what we have in a free country in England. Like, you're just a lump. You just get to be like a drunken lump. That's what we're fighting for. I don't know. Robert, wherever. I'm real curious if the revelations and the plot itself works, though, because my second watch came right after the book, so I could fill in all these little gaps. Like, were there surprises, and was it satisfying as a story?
It wasn't satisfying at first. I thought it was boring in the first part of it, but then in the second half, the twists really work and the revelations. And you talked about that scene where he tells his love interest, Miss Perry, what do you think a spy is? And it makes us question, are some of them just playing games? They just need some excitement in their life because these are a bunch of lonely men or weird people that are outcasts or whatever. It takes a special kind to be a spy for any country. And I think this film plays a game. Once those reveals start happening, I did feel like it was like 3-card Monty when after the trial things started getting revealed and my head was kind of spinning. But I was exhilarated by that because it's so understated in the first half of the film. I've never been as high on Le Carré as you guys seem to be. I think of just the American spy film, that number of James Bond with Connery. I'm used to action in my spy films, like growing up on those Bond films that I saw, and Jason Bourne and Jack Ryan, those American spies. That's always worked for me. But I've seen Tinker Tailor and The Constant Gardener and A Most Wanted Man, all of which I liked. but didn't necessarily love. They're probably all like 3.5s, but I've like respected and admired their films, like the way they are a slow burn. But it is that surface level stuff you're talking about, where it's manila envelopes and clandestine meetings, and it's psychological drama more than physical drama. So I like that stuff, but it hasn't totally clicked for me yet. So I do want to see the AMC series. They seem to be big in the Le Carré game with the Night Manager a couple years ago, with that actor that plays House. I love him. He's got a new HBO show.
Oh, Laurie.
I like Hugh Laurie. So he's
I
in
like
the Night
Peter
Manager.
Laurie too. Yeah, Peter Laurie. Get him in there.
And then you got Loki Hiddleston's in the Night Manager, but AMC did that series, and then the Little Drummer Girl, and so that's a more recent one. And I saw an article from 2017 that said the AMC is doing The Spy Who Came In From the Cold as a miniseries, but that was 3 years ago. So maybe it's about to come out or not come out, because I don't think those AMC series have been hits, but I think they might work better for me because it's more than 2 hours and you can build this world out and get more into the pace of it, because it really slows things down. But I like how this film has two modes, the first half and second half. I've never seen a Richard Burton film before. I didn't know he was British when he started talking. I'm like, oh, wasn't this guy married to?
I think he's like Welsh or something, right? He's like or Scottish. He's like a drunken Scot.
And I'm like, oh, is this the guy that was married to Elizabeth Taylor? Wait, no, he just acted with her in that movie. Like, were they married in real life?
Yeah,
yes.
They're huge. They're like the couple of the. Yeah, they were like the biggest couple in the world. That one movie's awesome.
Or he's one of several husbands of hers.
But he was like the one, like the volatile love story of that era, and they made a bunch of flops together, like they were like the Angelina Brad, like they could do anything they want type of thing before them, where they made movies that were way expensive, but he's great, I think.
And he has a couple of different looks to him. In this film, at first, I was like, it was him, but he would look more disheveled or less disheveled in certain scenes in the first half. I'm like, wait, is one of these guys Oskar Werner? Like, I know this is the Oscar show we're doing, the thinnest of themes we've ever had, but I'm in on this Oskar Werner guy, and so I'm like looking at. I've never seen a film with him in it, so I was looking at his picture on Letterboxd, and wait, is that guy the same guy they just showed? Because I've never seen either Richard Burton or Oskar Werner in any film, so I'm like trying to see who's who. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Burton is the main spy, and he was, but I didn't know he was British. I don't know, and Oskar Werner sounds like he's German or Austrian, and I don't know Claire Bloom. She plays the librarian sort of love interest. And then the film starts looking like Bridge of Spies, and I'm wondering, why was the guy on the bike shot on that Bridge of Spies? But it made me think, oh yeah, I liked Bridge of Spies. That was a good 3.5 movie too. Like, all these are just like 3.5s, just right in that wheelhouse. Like, very good. And this one has a little bit more drinking. I love that. Medicinal whiskey, he calls it. And this film came off to me, I'm like, okay, it's 1965, but it seems older than that. It doesn't even feel like its own contemporary, like for Cold War. Like, the Cold War was a long time. Like, officially the Cold War was like, I don't know, 1951 to 1991 or something crazy like that. And this is like on the earlier end of that. It feels older than what it is. Whereas Jules and Jim, which we just discussed, feels newer than it is. Like, it's a 62 film, and it feels newer than 62, and it's depicting a time period pre-World War I, and it feels way newer than that. And then this film feels older than it is. It took me the first half to get through how very proper and very stiff it was. And they're talking about communism and capitalism, and that's what spies do. But I liked the ominous score that kept telling me something's going, like, this is going to get very dark, and everybody's under threat. We're in this guarded city with these, like I said, clandestine meetings. And so I started feeling that psychological drama. And then I hear that name, George Smiley, that I know from Gary Oldman. And I did read that Le Carré wanted Smiley to be the anti-James Bond. And I'm like, yeah, just because he's like a little bit overweight and has a mustache and goes about things differently, but it's more the Burton character, the Lemus, that's the anti-Bond, being the main star, the protagonist. And it's interesting to hear you talk about the novel, how you could hear every thought. I'm glad the film does not give us his inner thoughts. It was really ambiguous as to, okay, I'm pretty sure this guy is the protagonist, but a couple times throughout, it made me question, why am I on this guy's side? Maybe he's in the wrong. And then we finally get Oskar Werner, the guy I was looking for, that meeting, he plays a Jewish agent, Fiedler, and I think this film gets better there because Burton and Werner have better chemistry than Burton and Claire Bloom. I kind of my gripe with this film would be that I didn't feel the romance between the two leads, the man and the woman. The two men had more interesting chemistry, or there was a more chemical reaction to each other because they're both spies. They're both trying to get something from each other.
That's
Burton.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's interesting to me because I agree. Once Werner shows up, it's like a jolt of energy to the film. That's when it takes off. I think he's not in this a lot, but he's really good. That's the same in the book. He's actually the character you like, and even within the book, it's not as clear here. But that Claire character is devastated by his end because of just the very little interactions. Like there's a level of respect and honor to him that no one else in the whole story has. But that's my thing with the book, that I think the movie actually gets better, which I actually think the relationship in the movie between him and her is better, only because in movies we're so used to like people falling in love in 2 minutes. For like 50 years, there was movies where men and women just fall in love in 2 minutes and you just have to accept it. The book spends a lot more time on it, and I don't think I buy it. And you don't really understand why she would be in love with him. For some reason in a movie, you just accept that more, but you're saying you didn't. So I think that is the problem here, if there is a big one, is that he doesn't know how to write a woman, probably, or a romance, maybe, because it's pretty cold.
Yeah, maybe a spy doesn't know how to be romantic and let your guard down and be vulnerable to fall in love. Maybe that's the core of it. I would actually like to watch this movie again, knowing where it ends up, because not only did I feel like there's more chemistry between Werner and Burton, I feel like Burton's acting came to another level. Mostly, I'm saying his physicality became really impressive. And it's actually before he meets Fiedler. He that newspaper article from Britain saying he's a wanted man, and his face changes, his body changes. Then he meets Fiedler, and his physicality in his acting was really impressive from that point on. But I think it was also impressive because it's different than what I had seen so far in the film leading up to that, and with Claire Bloom's character. So he was doing, his physicality was there with her, and when he's drunk and when he's disheveled and when he's getting out of jail, it's being very physical, but he's not saying much. So when it changes, once he's like spy versus spy, then I could see the difference and appreciate the first half more. There's some really good like cat and mouse conversations instead of cat and mouse, car chase. Here they're chasing like the truth of their past relationships and the future intentions. What is this guy trying to get out of me? The spies are thinking that, and Claire Bloom's character is thinking that, Mrs. Perry. And then this is where the film really kicked up a notch for me, was this Munt character.
What a punchable face. What a sour face.
That guy had the best hair.
Big old overgrown tall baby. And blonde, Aryan bastard. And
that guy had the best hair, man. It was like there was like 3 different. Oh, it was great. It was great.
It's so quick too how they bring him in, because they mention Munt a couple times in conversation, just asking like, do you know him? And you just hear the name, but you don't really pick up on who he is. And then suddenly he's large and in charge. He's interrogating Lemus, and he's talking shit about arresting Fiedler and taking them both to trial. And he's trying to ask Lemus what you did in a taxi cab, and it's just drunk Lemus. He's drinking at the time and talking about, I was really drunk that night and I can't remember. And then Fiedler marches in and flips the script on Munt, and now we're all marching into a courtroom to put Munt on trial for being a British spy. And then I'm thinking, wait, all these guys, they all sound British to me. Are all these guys Brits? Even Oskar Werner sounds British to me. Or is he Soviet? Is Comet? What is? I don't understand. But this all happens within 2 minutes, where we meet Munt for the first time, and now we're in trial against him within 2 minutes. And then I think that trial scene is really effective. And then coming out of that, when Munt flips and reveals that he actually is a British spy. That's where I felt that 3-card Monty, where the director, who I had never heard of, he does a really good job, or I guess it's Le Carré's writing, of just basically revealing see this is who this character is, right? Okay, now cover up the shell. It's the shell game, moving around rapidly, or the cards you flip over. Keep your eye on the ace, and now flip them back over, mix them up. Tell me where it is. Nope, it's over here now. That's what this film is doing. That's what Le Carré is doing. That's what these spies do to each other. That's the name of the game. We, as an audience, we're Miss Perry. We're trying to understand. We're Claire Bloom. Like, what now? Are you interested in me? Do you not care? Am I being a pawn in this game? What are you guys up to? She's us. And I like that scene in the getaway car where he escapes from jail with Miss Perry, and he bluntly tells her what spies really are, and that's just really fucking great. And that's where the movie shifts to another gear.
Yeah, and it's so satisfying plot-wise, and also so deflating from any kind of like decency level. It's like, oh, we just sunk into the gutter here. Yeah, like this guy's a fucking that's the film, and the character Lemus is very, very openly negative about the Soviet side and his own side, but more his point of view of the Soviet side and stuff. But we get a real view of the British side. Like, we're gonna hang with the Nazi because he can help us. Nazis are fine if they can help us. And Nan, I think her name is, she's disposable. People are disposable, and it's a big game, and it's like, oh, there's no good guys. It's just all bad. Everything's bad. And that's such a downbeat ending, which feels almost before its time in the 60s, because that's what you get out of, stylistically way different, but that's every Hollywood 70s movie is that ending.
I would say that ending is before its time in the narrative. It's too early. When the end comes up, I said out loud, no way. I didn't think it was going to be over because, yes, we got the British side, we got the German side. Why don't we get Fiedler's side? I wanted to see Fiedler fight back in some way, that he's going to be attacked by Munt. Let's go to Fiedler. Let's go to, is he Russian or whatever? That's like a third side to this. There's 3 sides to this coin, the 2 heads, tails, and the edge. Fiedler's either tails or the edge. Either way, we need to go back to him and see him fight back in some way. And so I loved the final scene at the wall, except that, one, it was weird that it didn't feel like they got shot. Like, we hear gunshots, but they don't look like they're being hit with bullets at all. It's just 2 actors laying down suddenly. And I didn't feel that they were really in love. I really wish the love story aspect was more effective. I think it would have really given me a gut punch in that last scene, and I would have been like, okay, that's a great ending. But like I said, I love the final scene, but I'm like, I want more Fiedler, and I want these 2 people to be people I believe are in love with each other. But still, that second half was so good in the reveals, and the twists is just fantastic. So it brought it way up from the first half, but it still left me wanting a little bit. Didn't feel like we got.
I had mentioned there was only one minor change from the novel, and you kind of brought it up anyway, so I'll just clarify what that was. The Nan Perry's character in the book was named Liz Gold, and they didn't want any Liz Taylor connections to the Liz name, so they just changed that outright.
But it was I don't remember how important it was in the what was her name in the movie? Nan what? The same last name?
Perry.
Yeah, see, and I don't know what kind of last name Perry is, but the fact that she's Jewish was important in the book, as was Fiedler being Jewish. It's a big part of that. And specifically how, in this film, the Soviet side treats her. I mean, that's a big negative. I mean, if you're going to say like the British side are doing terrible things, and the Eastern side, the way they are going to sacrifice her and use her. She's a communist, a British communist, but it does at least point to the fact that because she's a Jewish communist, she's disposable. I know, like, the idea is one person's disposable if it helps the many. At least that's the viewpoint that Lemus is putting forward for the Eastern side. Like, they'll just use up one person if it helps the many. But specifically that she's Jewish and Fiedler's Jewish are why they're so disposable. It's for Munt specifically, but England goes along with it. So I don't know. That's kind of a part of it too. I'll tell you what I think my favorite thing in the whole film is the there's like this really comedic and harsh disregard on the Eastern side, the Soviet side, for anyone below them on the ladder of importance. So you get the early scenes of Lemus kind of being lured. I know it's a scheme and he's going to the Eastern side on purpose, but they're kind of like trying to recruit him to turn and be a Eastern spy against England, and they kind of hand him up the ladder until they get to Fiedler and then ultimately to Munt. But each guy kind of shits on the guy below them as they hand him over and like says, yeah, get the fuck out of here, or go start the car. And every time Richard Burton's Lemus has just this absolute glee with watching them get shit on. It's so funny.
When Fiedler shits on the Nazi guy, he was like laughing about it audibly. It was great.
And part of it's the character he's supposed to be playing within it, but of like, I'm being lured over, and I'm drunk all the time, so everything's kind of funny. But I really like, that there's some comedy to that. And as much as that relationship between him and Nan you don't buy it. I think you buy Burton's performance sometimes, because when she's brought into the courtroom, he really breaks out of his like, holy shit, she's here. She's the only thing he actually gives a shit about at all. Everything else is a game, but she's a real person he cares about. And it really irks him, not only because the plan is going off the rails, but also she's really all that matters. And then his decision at the end is, while the relationship's not that believable, if you buy it at all, you can kind of see how, it's all a game and I don't care, but if they're really going to sacrifice her, then fuck it, I'm giving in. Like, this is enough. So, I don't know. It doesn't always work, but, like, the plot works around it, just, like, the chemistry doesn't necessarily work between them.
Yeah, when he makes that decision on the wall at the end, it's like, don't you dare go over to Smiley. Like, you can't go that route. You can't leave that poor girl there. Even if she's already dead. I thought she was just, like, collapsed. I thought she was just, like, the way she, like, goes limp, her body, because I didn't think she got shot. It looks like she just, like, gave up on the ladder. I'm like, this girl I think she doesn't want to leave. She's doing something to stay. And so when he jumps down, I thought he was going to, like, revive her and get her back over, but then he gets shot, and they just both lay there. And so I was like, that was a good choice. But in court, I wasn't sure he loved her or cared about her. When he calls her a pawn in the game, I didn't think he liked her, but then he says, she's like, the love, was it real or something? He said, we made it too easy for them. It's like, oh, he did care for her. He did fall for her. But otherwise, his dead eyes wouldn't tell you that. Dead eyes of a spy.
Check out Jules and Jim and the Spy That Came In From the Cold. Couple of fine films indeed. All right, guys. My name, once again, Eric. I'm here at Flicksation Studios, P City Wisco. You can follow me on Twitter, Hazer, HAZER75, and nothing else active right at this point. So, just check me out here on the Flicksation Podcast. Ian the Minister, thanks for joining the show as well.
Yeah, this was fun. I wish we had a lot more Oscar movies to talk about, but there's not a whole lot there, so we'll have to think of a different name next time. I don't know, but
we missed a chance with Jules and Jim with Richard Jewell. You saw? I don't know if that got Oscar contention. But and we did Uncut Gems last show, and now Jules and Jim. So there's something there.
Yeah, your idea there was great. It's just no one wanted to watch the idea. No one wanted to watch Richard Jewell, but what was yours? Uncut Jewel and Gems, Gems and Jewels. I can tell you, I don't think I posted it because I didn't want to be like the guy that keeps making fun of Richard Jewell type thing. But do you know the big hot take I'll give you from that? Maybe I posted this, but the big hot take is that Paul Walter Hauser in that movie is way, way better than John Hamm. John Hamm is unbelievably bad performance.
Wow. Okay.
So Hauser blows ham out of his sandwich.
Yeah, I mean,
about Hauser.
I like Mad Men, but man, yeah, Ham doesn't. He's just the same shit all the time. I just saw him do the exact same thing in The Report the other day. So.
Oh.
Yeah, he used to stick to comedy. He's good in comedies.
Maybe he just needs more takes or something. But whatever. If Eastwood said get it in one, he decided to go at like 15 out of 10 in every scene, and on the first take, and then they just left it in. So it was like a cartoon character in a real movie, and it was bad. Yeah, so I'm on the internet. I think thin_white_Duke on Twitter, and Best of the Decade coming up. I guess I'll hold all these. So just listen to the show.
And Robert, thanks as always for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks to you guys for providing a great idea to watch a couple of obscure old black and white films, taking my mind off. I don't post many hot takes on Twitter, but I am watching stuff like Watchmen, and I'm listening to We're Watching the Watchmen, Eric's other podcast, and it's pretty darn great, so I recommend that. And coming down the home stretch on Watchmen, so if anybody wants to talk about that with me on the internet, you can find me at Robert Gassaway.
Thanks for listening, guys. We will catch you on the Flick side.